This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook, Volume 2, and today is August 8th, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
Well, hi, Brian, and thanks for having me on again. My name is Andrew Hirschhorn, and I was with Hofstra Radio from 1982 through 86.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming back to share your stories. If you don't mind reminding us, what shows and programs did you work on at the station?
I did a lot of sports. I actually was privileged to do The Land of Make Believe,
Mm-hmm.
which was a jazz show, and I did some news, but mostly sports. We cover the games and also like some production work in the sports magazine, which Jeff helped us to produce and get started as well.
Okay. Did you have any titles or positions at the station?
Yeah, I was the sports director for 2 years, and that's basically the only position. Oh yeah, and I did traffic for a while. I was like an interim traffic person, which I didn't distinguish myself. We'll leave it at that. I carried it kind of on my back for the summer because nobody else was doing it or wanted to. But the minute they found a suitable replacement, I was out, which was mutual. So.
Understood. A lot of people who are traffic directors often get signed up and either they don't know what they're getting into or they have an idea and they're just biding their time to get it over with. Was your arm twisted to make you take that?
I don't remember. I thought it would be kind of cool. It's a lot of work, and then you got to make sure everything's signed on right. It was just, I'm not a detailed person, so I mean, it was a bad match, but it wasn't a great fit. But you do what you can to help out the station because there's a kind of in those days there was a skeleton crew over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also pulling like 3 or 4 slots a week doing jazz. So it was a lot of work, but I enjoyed it. It just that was part of it. So
Got it. Got it. So let's talk about, you said you served as sports director for 2 years. What made you want to apply for that?
well, I like sports, and it was a nuanced kind of thing. I found that it always bothered me like you'd be doing a music break, let's say for jazz or classical, and you'd have about 60 seconds or 2 minutes to get it right. And then if you made one flub, it kind of stood out like a sore thumb because in 60 seconds you'd wanted 2 flubs. So I said, wow, if I had like 2 or 3 hours, I can make a couple of flubs and no one will really notice because it's a bigger playing field. So that was one of my initial instincts. And also I had panic when I first went on the air. Like every time I saw that red light and the studio went ghostly quiet,
Mm.
I used to get like this panic attack and I felt my whole like frog in my throat. So I figured by doing a lot of on-air work, I'd get rid of that anxiety, and certainly, doing sports, you're talking for 2, 3 hours, you'll get rid of that anxiety, that public speaking fear. So
Absolutely. Now, for you, was it an attraction to sports that brought you to the radio station, or was it this opportunity of being on the air and doing sports that was more important?
I think it was just being on part of a radio station. And
Mm.
it was that. And also, I wasn't sure really what I wanted to do. I know I wanted to be part of radio. I saw myself as a DJ or a news guy. But there's a lot of, I mean, I was probably more what they call, I guess, on air or talent than engineering or the behind the scenes. But other than that, it wasn't really anything specific. I remember I joined the station. I was still like, it was the summer before I was a freshman. And I had to get a pair of glasses at like Cohen's Optical or something. And I got these really cool like shades. And they were
Hmm.
like yellow tinted. I'm like, now I'm Mr. DJ. Now I'm ready to enjoy life. And I'm going to have a great life and I'm going to be a DJ and I'm going to do a shift and have a good living and live by the ocean on the West Coast. That never happened. But that was the dream I had in mind. Like they had these, Budweiser commercials where a guy would be spinning records and, the shift is over and he was going to go out into town and figured this would be my life. And it didn't go like that. But, listen, Budweiser sometimes isn't always accurate.
I have visions of Dr. Johnny Fever, but not in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, we all kind of had that. I mean, I think I was very bored. Intercession freshman year. And I called the sports director. Said, let me get involved with sports because I was doing jazz and I wasn't that motivated. And then I just got involved in sports, and it was a challenge because it was a little different. You
Hmm.
really have to, play by play is like a different language, and you're improvising, and you have to learn the jargon. It's a nuanced kind of thing. And I think I kind of fell in with that. Plus, I developed a strong friendship with the sports director, the late Mark Heller. So
Hmm.
those two things combined, and then I really began to practice. I mean, I would listen to all the pros and I would write down exactly what they said. And I broke it down like a foreign language, like you were learning Spanish or German or whatever. And it was like, if you were going to throw a pass, well, if it's a long arcing pass, you're going to sail it, you might arc it, you might throw a rainbow. But if you're whipping like a frozen rope, you're whipping, you're firing. And, big men like fullbacks would lumber in football. They might ram and plow, whereas a little scat back would dart and cut. And so I began to see how you could break the language into compartments and then really sound like you knew what you were doing. And I found that very interesting because I was teaching myself a foreign language, which was English, but it was a sports English, which was a
Hmm.
foreign language. So that
Hmm.
was it was almost intellectual. Yeah. And I mean, I had these long charts. And then after a game, I used to go through my charts and say, how many words did I use that I should have used? So I would then go through like a post debriefing, so it was kind of scientific. And I practiced a lot,
That's
I mean, it was a
yeah.
practicing kind of thing. I mean, cable had just come out with like, we're going to have like 50 football games over the weekend, high school and college. So you could go from channel to channel to channel to channel. And in the time span of one play, get in 7 or 8 calls on a football team or even basketball. And it was that kind of repetition, which was available with cable, that enabled me to try to accelerate my progress. So it was that kind of stuff. And then I began to really focus on it my sophomore year. So
Was that something that Mark suggested or someone else, or is that something you just did on your own?
I did on my own. Because I saw that nobody, it's a terrible thing to say, but there was one guy who was really good, and he actually called the Giants games. I still think he does. Bob Papa, I think, does the
Hmm.
games, and there's a lot of Papas all over New York radio, so they must be very popular there. No pun intended. But Bob Papa was really good. But the rest of the people, most people I listened to, they'd be doing game after game after game and again, and they weren't getting any better. And then I remembered that somebody said, I think it was maybe perhaps even Joe Namath, you don't win games when you're playing the game. You win the game on the practice field. You're not going to get better or stronger just doing broadcasts. You're going to get good when you're not doing the broadcast. The broadcast is your time to shine. So I realized that the practice that was involved was a lot more than just doing the games and getting good at it. And that was basically when I really began to sink my teeth into it. And
Hmm.
then I really didn't like the way my voice sounded. I had a very squeaky voice. Somebody told me that nobody wants someone to. I remember somebody said to me, an upperclassman, you can't announce sports if you sound like a woman, which probably wouldn't go over very well today, but that was his saying. And he made me feel very badly. So I worked on dropping my voice and working on diction. And I didn't know what I wanted to sound like. And then one day I'm watching TV and a guy's doing a toothpaste or a toothbrush commercial, a great voice. And I said, this is the voice I can hear in my brain. And then, it came together. But that took about 5 to 6 months of practice. Where you're tape recording, you're listening, driving my poor mother crazy.
Hmm. Yeah, wow, that's very ambitious to take that on. And you said at first that was partially to help you get rid of the anxiety, but then you found this niche and you really dove in and got very into it. And I imagine early on you were calling some basketball games, and then perhaps your sophomore year were you getting into football games? And do you remember who you were calling games with?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think it was basically Mark. I think it was like the two of us, and then I think it was upperclassman who was really, really talented, and he worked for CBS. Todd Ant, and he was
Hmm.
like a legend. Like Todd Ant was like Babe Ruth or succeeding Mickey Mantle. I mean, Todd Ant was the man with his big, tall guy with a deep baritone voice. And he worked professionally. He's very talented, very nice guy. So he also did some games with me. But it was like the first, when I really was practicing, it just wasn't coming together. And the first game I did, I remember as a sophomore, there was a lot of uhs and stammers, and I was all over the place. And then suddenly, the second time I tried it, Mark gave me another shot, and it just fell together, and it was beautiful. It was like, wow, this is really flowing. This shit is really working, and I was thrilled, So, I mean, because when you see the fruits of your labor paying off, and you're getting a flow, and you know. But again, was I ever as quick and as fast as Bob Papa was over at Fordham, so I used to say, okay, you're gonna chase the rabbit. You're gonna go after the best person out there in New York College radio. Probably Bob Papa at Fordham, and he went on to announce the Giant game. So this is no slouch. And I don't think I ever really reached that level, but that was someone who was worthy of aspiring to. So.
Hmm. Yeah, it's nice to have those high expectations and to have a standard to set for yourself. Now, as sports director, I imagine a lot of your job is scheduling who's going to call the games, and then if there's travel and sort of the paperwork and the minutia of that. Was that an enticing part of it, or is that just something that you had to do so you could call games?
That was just I mean, Jeff took care of most of it, to be honest. Jeff had
Yeah.
a great joke. He used to say, well, we all know that if the plane should crash, your family gets $25,000. He says, but we know that when undergraduates crash and burn, they grow back. And that was his joke. But he took care of he took care of everything. And like you had to order these telephone lines in those days. They weren't even like radio lines; they were phone lines, and the bells were breaking up. They were like the baby bells and the big bells and Bell Telephone, and it was so hard to get a phone line installed. And Jeff had like this whole worksheet. What happened essentially was right before I came in, Dr. Stewart, who was the president, said, I want all Hofstra games, both home and away, on radio because he was a former football player.
Hmm.
So he had a special president's account for travel, food, and the wires and everything else and the equipment. So Jeff could draw upon a special president's account, and it was expected that the sporting events would happen. So I think he had the president's office kind of overlooking his shoulder because I think Dr. Stewart wanted to see that these football games, especially on the road, were broadcast. And I think basketball too, mostly football though. So I remember Jeff with these long worksheets were like, spoke to Bell Telephone in Louisiana on May 6th. And like
Hmm.
they lose the order. I mean, it was crazy. And then you'd show up, you take a long 5-hour flight, and there'd be no telephone line there. It was insane. One time I remember I used to travel with, I think, like a mile long of telephone cable and
Hmm.
alligator clips. And I actually ran a line out of the press box through the arena into the athletic department offices and into a phone, and I alligator clipped the broadcast through, which was insane, but that's what you had to do to try to get on the air. I mean, it was that bad at times. So now it's changed. I mean, now the cellular and everything else, but we didn't have that in those days. And then the biggest game of the year, I remember we played St. John's, and we couldn't find our phone line. Our phone line existed, but it went somewhere. And then we tracked it to Cablevision's sports van. And it was like 56,000 wires going into Cablevision's sporting van. And we
Hmm.
said, you have our telephone line. And they looked at us like we were crazy. So Mark Heller and I walked away. I mean, nowadays I probably would have called the cops and said they have our damn phone line and they stole it and tell them to give us that back. But I mean, I was a kid then, I didn't know. So, but I mean, you would literally the phone line, the biggest game of the season against St. John's. After St. John's was this huge rivalry, and they just sucked up our phone line. So.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's got to be it's got to be a terrible feeling when you think you're prepared and you show up and you're excited for this big event, and then the technology doesn't work. And today, obviously, like you said, things are different. You can text someone, you can call. There's all kinds of different ways to get in touch with the studio or whoever it might be. But then you're kind of stuck. You've got to figure it out on the spot.
Well, I mean, Mark had a picture of me. I don't know where it went, but I was actually spread eagled on top of the Kings Point. We used to play Kings Point, which is right here
Right.
in Niagara. And I was like spread eagled on the roof of the field house because I said, I'll be damned if we're 5 miles from Hofstra, we can't get on the air. And I was able to get to a press box phone, which wasn't our phone, but Alligator clipped my way in. So I kept buying more and more cable and just these big boxes. And finally, I went to like Radio Shack, or I think I went to the telephone company, and I said, "Can I buy like 5 miles worth of cable? And can that travel through the airports and stuff?" And so, literally, I was traveling with like an entire telephone arsenal. I had the wire, I had the alligator clips, I had the wires, and Jeff would always be like, "Remember, Hirschhorn, it's yellow, black, red, green," and those are the two combinations. And that was, I got fairly savvy, and then I used to like flag down the telephone guys who were putting up lines and get little ideas from them, like, how do I know it's a live line? What can I do? And they tell me, well, you can use this device or just try biting it. You won't electrocute yourself, but you'll feel the shock. So I mean, you learn little tricks on how to try to make it happen. And I actually was able to when I was doing soccer. Jeff agreed to do soccer games while the team wasn't with Hofstra. There were a professional team called the New York Nationals. And we were in Oklahoma City, and we wired it through a locker room telephone because there was no telephone, even though we ordered it. So I ran like 5 miles of cable down from the press box through the stadium and into the locker room. And then in the middle of the game, somebody was calling for a pizza, and we were using that as our game line. So it was, thank God he didn't say anything bad, but yeah. So
Wow.
I couldn't bear the thought of not getting on. It was heart wrenching. You're right.
Yeah.
And I remember then there was another game at home. Now Jeff had, I think Frank Runstein, the chief engineer at that point, I think they built a radio line at home to avoid all these problems. It was a real nice, like 5K or high quality line. It wasn't working. And a combination of the aggravation of that, a big game the end of the season, and then about 18 cups of coffee on a Friday, a triple death overtime kind of thing. And I nearly had a heart attack. I remember I really thought I was going to have a stroke. And I had to actually call my mother. In my car, said, "You got to pick me up and bring me to the hospital because I think I'm having a heart attack." It was that aggravating. Because, I mean, you just can't get on the air. And that would really tick me off. Now, I went through the same thing, by the way, the other day, Brian. It's funny. Not with remotes, but I'm trying to record these podcast drama series things I'm doing, like the radio plays. And every minute there's a lawnmower, a dog barking,
Uh-huh.
and then when everything clears, I finally got some quiet. The tree guys come, like 4 of them around the area, and it's like you're being bombarded. I'm like, where am I living? In a war zone. And I actually felt that same frustration. So I
Yeah. Yeah. When you want things to be right, when you want things to come off, and there's all these little things, it can be extremely aggravating. Well, thank you for going back in time and remembering that. And I'm sure there's a few people listening going, "Oh yeah, alligator clips," and picturing taking that landline telephone apart and hooking up the wires. I mean, there's a segment of the audience, I think, that won't know what that is, but you
Well,
definitely had to know how things work.
yeah, if you looked at an old time phone, which I think I still keep, by the way, because believe it or not, if there was ever like a thermonuclear blast, our cell networks would be, completely done. But the phone lines themselves will operate probably through a nuclear blast because they're at a different level and everything else. And I was even consulting with a gubernatorial candidate about 2 years ago, and I said every home should have a home phone and a landline, so to speak, not a cable line, but a landline that will survive, and you'll be able to communicate.
Right.
But the point is that is, you unscrew the mouthpiece where you'd speak. There's
Hmm.
like I guess an amplifier, and there's 2 metal prongs, and then you would just attach the alligator clips. Because also they had a thing called a micro track, which was a device which always seemed to fail. And no matter, I
Mhm.
mean, Mark loved it. He thought it was a little James Bond box. And I said, I trust this thing. Like, it's like taking this thing on the road for me was like the equivalent of like jumping out of an airplane. I mean, the, the airplane was a quick death. The slow death was this box. And I would always bring extra stuff because I knew this darn box wouldn't work. And I brought an actual phone with the alligator clips, and you could use them courtside. There was always a backup. You
Right.
had to back up after it was like just missile silo thinking. Like if this fails, then what? If that fails, then what? And I mean, my ultimate plan, I had gaffing tape. I would gaff. I was ready to gaff at like Santa Clara University, or was it Pepperdine? We were out there on the West Coast. I was going to gaff right through um, the bleachers into the athletic department offices, keep gaffing the wires and get her into the athletic department offices for Pepperdine, get somebody to open up a phone and run the lines in. I mean, that's, it becomes a kind of alpha beta kind of very competitive thing. You can hear it in my voice. Yeah, it just would drive me absolutely through I'd go crazy. Like, why'd I take a trip for?
Right.
And Mark was much cooler about it. He said, well, we got to meet Digger Phelps over at Notre Dame, and we got to, meet Jimmy Valvano at NC State, which we did, which over. I said, but we didn't get on the air. What the hell did we take a 5-hour flight for?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm guessing the different personality types worked well on the air. That you guys were able to work as a team, or at least I hope so.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes and no. I think Mark was a little more. He had to take charge, and I had to take a second seat, which was fine. He caught me a line and gave me some opportunities. But I mean, I think it was more like when I'm really motivated, like when you're really motivated, like you'll learn how to change your own oil, even if you don't know, because you're the only game in town. I mean, I'm not a technical kind of guy. I'm really not. And it's funny because I'm talking to like an 81-year-old engineer who knows like everything about everything. And he used to
Hmm.
run at Delphi's board and its tower and it's everything. But when you're really motivated, if it's like this is the only way to get on the air, then you just learn it. It's like survive. How are you going to learn to breathe under? Well, you're going to learn to breathe underwater. I mean, that's and it happened too many times.
Yeah.
I mean, it happened a lot, and it was just gut wrenching. I mean, really, that was probably my worst memories at
Wow.
Hofstra Radio was just not getting on the air.
So. Do you feel like you, as sports director, is just someone at the station, you got to interact with Jeff a lot?
Yeah, there wasn't we interacted. I think for him was more by necessity.
Right.
Um, he naturally disliked sports guys because before me, my predecessors had somehow used an Albert Einstein interview, the last known recorded interview with Einstein, which he wanted to sell to PBS and make a lot of money. It became an air check for a football game. So he said, I never forgave sports after that.
Hmm.
And what am I going to say to that? I mean, that wasn't my doing. And then we did a dinner tape of like Albert Einstein getting suddenly like blocked out, and there's the sports guys. It was a mock up, but he wasn't laughing. Um, I think there's a mutual respect, and I think years later, how much I learned from him was very substantial. I mean, he's a founder of Hofstra Radio, and he brought a certain, I think we discussed it, amongst ourselves, you and I. He brought a very entrepreneurial, let's just go for it type of attitude.
Hmm.
I think he's a very confident man in his own right with regard to either building something, and he's very handy, or announcing. And so when we came to him, like, we want to do Hofstra Sports Magazine, like, okay, pull out a pad, let's do it. And then 2 or 3 years later, I said, there's a professional soccer team playing at Hofstra Stadium. Can we do the games? I mean, what the heck? I must have been a good salesman, or he must have been feeling very gratuitous. It was over the summer. He's like, okay, what are the games? Show me the schedule. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I remember when he sent out the proposal letter, it was like, wow, we might actually be announcing professional soccer. And I'm going to be traveling maybe to Oklahoma City, Houston, and Dallas. And sure enough, about 6 weeks later, I was actually traveling with a professional soccer team. Not only in those areas, but doing the home games. So that was pretty cool, especially since I didn't know a thing about soccer. And I had to actually buy a pair of cleats to get a soccer rule book from Adidas. There's nothing online in those days. And Adidas gave you a soccer rule book with the cleats for soccer. And that gave me some insight to the game. And then I watched one or two games and try to just, I think I learned two things. I think I learned two good phrases to use from watching the games. You work your way through it. I mean, I remember doing an interview. This guy comes in. They go, "The great such and such is here." I didn't even know his name. I go, "Okay, And then they said, and I'll never forget this. And then they told me his name. And I'm doing an I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know who he's playing. Oh, soccer's been good to you, huh? Now you're just winging it. It's like running into someone and you can't remember their name. So there was some funny things going on.
Wow. You mentioned a moment ago about the magazine show. What was that about?
I felt there should be a production show. Like, in other words, we did some production. Maybe we'd have some clips, but I used to really go nuts with the actuality.
Uh-huh.
Mark wasn't a big actuality guy. And Mark was like, "Hey, Brian, big game Sunday." "Yes, it is, Mark." And I said, "This is some corny stuff." I said, the networks cut it up and they splice it in and they make it sound tight and they get rid of the BS. I want to do the same thing. Because I had a lot of interviews too, but you can't just keep playing into. So I started to cut things up and I found I was very quick at it. I couldn't do music editing, but I could use that block and that blade very quickly.
Mm.
And I said, "Why don't we produce a sports-oriented Hofstra sports magazine, which would be Hofstra as the lead story, and then a little bit about New York and local sports and the rest of the league." And I was going to call it the Hofstra Sports Magazine, and Jeff said call it the WRHU Sports Magazine.
Mm.
And that's how it started. But we came to him, and he just was so cool about it. Like, I mean, he just gave me some great ideas. I felt like we had to keep taking breaks like they do in the real world. Like, we'll throw in a PSA after we do our intro. And when we come back, we'll have the opening story about. He said, "Why are you going to do that? Just go right into your first story. Why are you going to take a break and room momentum? I don't know. Don't you want to take that? No, we'll go right." So he just had certain ideas which really helped a lot. So.
Wow, that's pretty amazing that Jeff you mentioned, and I'm sure some of it's tongue in cheek that Jeff didn't like the sports department, but he's encouraging you to do that and giving you notes on that and helping you to broadcast a professional sports team on the air. That's really pretty generous and pretty thoughtful and pretty forward thinking for a guy running a college radio station, I
Yeah,
think.
I mean, I still it beguiles me, what the connection really was. I mean, they played at Hofstra, but big deal. I mean, pigeons land too at Hofstra. You're not going to do 3 hours of pigeon shows. But he, thought it would be a good idea or something. I guess the idea was we were able to get our call letters. We were listed like it used to be news. They had like
Yeah.
media for the night, like Mets and Yankees and this and that. And then it would be like soccer, New York Nationals, and then WRHU 88.7 FM, which was a big thrill. So we were right up there with the pros. And I guess it was some exposure for the radio station too. Maybe, it was that kind of thing. Who knows? So.
Wow, that's great stuff. I mean, you've given me already a bunch of great stories and events. I'm wondering, is there a game that you called, or a song, or an event that, in your mind, kind of defines your time at the station?
Yeah, my junior year, there was a guy who came in from UCLA for one season. He probably could have been a first round draft choice. Had things worked out for him. But I guess they had like 9 quarterbacks at UCLA. So he transferred, he's a Long Island kid, and he transferred over to Hofstra. So you had like a Division I quarterback playing Division III football.
Hmm.
And then you had another good story about a wide receiver who I was quite friendly with, Emil Wolgamuth, who was a very talented athlete. And he got his knee torn up very badly, came back stronger and faster than ever.
Wow.
And in those days, in order to make the playoffs, you had to basically go undefeated. You had to be like 10-0, 9-0. You couldn't lose a game. Otherwise, you didn't get to the postseason. And so Hofstra was about to lose this game. And I think it was in Albany. And this guy McLaughlin, who just was Tommy McLaughlin, a very good quarterback. He could run, he could throw, he's strong, and it was like a Hail Mary into the end zone, kind of like the best way to describe it was the way Joe Montana hit a guy when they did their big playoff run, the 49ers. And Wolgemuth must have gone like 30 feet in the air to catch the ball. And it was unbelievable. And I remember like I pegged the remote meter. And I was using, by the way, the phone with the alligator clips, not this micro track, it was called. And it like stuck on the red. Like I was screaming so loudly that it just stuck on the red. The most incredible play you've ever seen. The guy must have climbed like 30 feet in the air, Wolgemuth, to catch this alley oop kind of pass. And they won the game and they kept themselves undefeated. And eventually, that set up the showdown for St. John's, who was also undefeated.
Got it.
And then Cablevision stole our damn phone line, which was the biggest game of our lives. But that's how life works. So I can't say they stole. I don't want to get myself in trouble. Let's just say our phone line mysteriously disappeared into 60,000 cables that they had. So
were you able to get that St. John's game on the air?
no.
Oh no.
No. And
Oh wow.
that's like, yeah, and this was the game, and they actually lost to St. John's, so they didn't make the playoffs. It was a nip and tuck game to the very end, because St. John's and Hofstra Radio was very big. It wasn't St. John's fault. It was that I guess we should have been there 12 hours before to guard the phone line. We just didn't know.
Wow. Oh, I was gonna ask if there were any, disappointments or things that didn't work out for you. And I guess that would be probably near the top of the list, if not the top.
Yeah, it wasn't the end of the world. But the other things, basketball season, and things to call that way. But by and large, we were able to get. Jeff did a good job administratively. He handled, I think, most of the administration with getting it done.
Yeah. Yeah.
As far as the phone lines, and that was the big thing, getting that phone line put in for those away games. That was a real bear. That was hard. But yeah, not getting that St. John's, and you've got the phone line, and it just runs right into like 60,000 cables. Nowadays in retrospect, I should have just taken a pair of clippers, clipped it where I could, and then rewired it to my roll of wires. But I don't know why. For some, maybe I wasn't ready. I think I started buying this stuff later. But had I done it, I probably would have clipped it and said, "This is ours, F you," and I'm taking my line. But
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do when you're an undergraduate and you're talking to professionals and adults, and it can be intimidating. Oh, my heart breaks for you on that one. So my next question has to do with funny events or funny stories or things that make you laugh. Is there something that whenever you think about it from your time at Hofstra that makes you laugh or brings a smile to your face?
there was a lot of joy and camaraderie. To be honest, it's like I think I was a little more intense than the average undergraduate, so I was very, very driven.
Hmm.
So I don't think I really horsed around a lot. I'm trying to think. Yeah, probably the funniest thing was just like some of Jeff's comments to me, like when I was playing a music reel, Tails Out, and he's like, "Are you kidding me? You'll never, ever, ever work in music in radio. Maybe you can do anything else. You could do no news or sports or engineering. He says, but you'll never be able to. If you didn't know that this was a tails out tape, you have no business working in music and radio." And I said, well, I figured it's Swede and Hans Olsen, and maybe this is what Swedish sounds like a backwards tape. What did I
Right.
know? And he just was like, just something like that. So.
Mm. You talked about your drive and your focus. Was there ever a moment where you thought, I don't want to do this. I'm going to do something else, or one of those bad moments where you thought about walking away, or were you pretty committed to the station?
No, I was really pretty committed to the station. I have to say, I was pretty focused. I think when I saw the pay scale of what's out there
Hmm.
and the way people were acting to give you like a minimum wage job, like they were giving you like a part in a movie next, acting in a movie in Hollywood. then it began to become a little disillusioned when you realize that like you could go to Fridays, work as a waiter part time, and make more a week than you would as a news director at a radio station. And it wasn't even entry level. I ended up in a station, um, which was it was north. It was north. But the pay scale and the amount of hours, and I was like, wow, I could be waiting tables at Fridays and probably making double. So when you see the pay scale and you see like these people who think they're really giving you so much, like, are you kidding me? Yeah.
Hmm.
And maybe it's because I was from Long Island or whatever. And that's when I went to law school. I said, this is some, and my father said, you can just buy a damn station and put yourself on the board of directors and then fire the idiots that wouldn't hire you in the first place. And that was his attitude, and he was right. I mean, my dad was a lawyer, and that's when I went to law school. He says, you can buy a radio station eventually
Hmm.
and just put everyone you want to work and whatever. You don't need this crap where somebody's going to say, I'm doing you the biggest favor for giving a job for $6 an hour. So I think when that hit, I really began to understand, this is pretty awful.
Yeah.
For me, entry level was awful, and I wasn't the only one. I mean, in talking with people on the Facebook group, they would say the same thing. Like, try to get a job, the pay was awful. They went to work for a bank. I mean, it's like, come on.
Yeah. So it wasn't anything that was negative about the station. It was the professional prospects that made you want to
Yeah, I mean, the
step back.
station was a lot of fun. The station was fun, like anything else. I mean, I also wanted to become a philosophy teacher in history, and everyone said don't do either because philosophy and history professors just don't get a lot of money. So
Yeah.
you can get all the schooling, you might as well just go for something like your MD or your JD because you're not going to make anything. And I always thought that was pretty awful, but that's just the way it was. So it wasn't just unique to radio; it was just certain profession. Like in Europe, they used to pay professors very well, but not in America necessarily.
Hmm. Here's a hypothetical. Speaking of being on the air, technology aside, this is a hypothetical. You get a call from someone at WRHU, and we need someone to fill in for a couple of hours on whatever date. Are you willing to do
Oh yeah, unless I'm not breathing
it?
or I don't have a car.
Well, if you're willing to do it and you have your choice of format, would you want to call a game? Would you want to do a music show, a talk show? What would you want to do?
I wouldn't mind doing any of it.
Hmm.
I'm being honest. I mean, I guess yeah. I think the late night, like The Rock, I like that too. Though I can't say I didn't like that, but hell yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have an FCC license anymore. I don't think,
I
but I
don't.
would.
I don't think it matters anymore. I don't think you need that
Oh,
anymore. But
I would do. I
but
would.
but you'd be
Yeah.
willing to get on the air. Well, that's
Oh
fun.
heck yeah! I would be there in 30 seconds
All
and
right.
love every minute of it. I'm sure, and be
Uh,
begging to go back.
yeah, yeah. So what do you miss most about your time at Hofstra Radio?
Well, I've been able to recapture a lot by doing this crazy radio drama place here. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, the excitement. What I miss is the general spirit of being an undergraduate, which is the world is opening up. There's all these new things to be learned, and you're like a puppy dog in a backyard, and it's just like, wow, there's this whole world. And um, for many years, things felt very two dimensional and stale. And even though you're making money, let's say being a lawyer, it doesn't mean that you're invigorated in the same way. Maybe you're invigorated buying a new car or buying a new suit, but it's not the same feeling as, oh my God, look at these possibilities. And now, like, I'm like, wow. I was texting you the other day, Jeff Krause, possible roles for him. I'm like, what
Mhm.
about Odin? Yeah. What about Jeff playing Jehovah? Yeah. I mean, it's just the creativity. I guess that's what I missed the most, and now thank God I've been able to get back. When I did the podcast, though, I wasn't really that creative like that, and even doing social media posts, it was just annoying. But this has been fun. So I miss the creativity. I
Yeah.
really do. You know.
Yeah, we've had conversations outside of this conversation, and you've been doing some work. You've been making audiobooks and writing fiction and things like that. And again, in our conversations, you've mentioned that Jeff has been something of an inspiration. Do you mind talking a little bit about what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I never did it when I was there. It just never presented. I never really had an interest, but I'd always watch, or I should always listen to, um, like radio drama series.
Hmm.
Part of the reason was we were banned from watching television in my house. My mother, I guess, felt it made us stupid or something, and she was probably wrong because we got stupid without it or with it. But on a serious note, so I remember like we used to listen to CBS Radio Mystery Theater, and E.G. Marshall was this Broadway director or something, and he hosted it. I actually wrote him a letter, and he actually called me at the house to talk to me. Like it was, I was like flabbergasted. But anyway, the whole idea is that can you make something come to life?
Hmm.
So the thrill of being an author was creating a world. You're immersed in it, and you can almost hear the dialogue. The characters move without you thinking about them. They're throwing their lines at you. You're trying to keep up with them and record it. That's when you know you're flowing. It's like you're an athlete moving without the ball,
Hmm.
and that's it. Doesn't always happen, but when you're in the flow and you're writing, the dialogue and the action is developing around you. You're almost a spectator just taking it down. That's really immersed. And then when you leave that scene, by the way, very hard to do things like drive a car. You're so fixated in one world, very hard to then function in this world. I'd have to sit in my car for like 20 minutes and come down. Um, so now when you take that, so I started writing books again and putting them on Amazon and whatever, getting some sales. Then when you say, let's do something, it wasn't my idea. Why don't you now try to make a podcast drama of it? I'm like, damn, that's a new idea. And because you're working with the voices, it's not so much the eloquence of the words, but it's encapsulating it and getting it right and using the voices. It's been amazing. I mean, I just started a new book about, or a new radio show about the end of the world according to the ancient Aztecs. Very
Hmm.
interesting. And mastering the culture, getting a feel for what it's about. There's real places in Mexico, they call it Mesoamerican and all this. We never taught this, so all these worlds open up, and that's exciting. And you're learning, and you're developing ideas, and then like you're ready to like, okay, what about if I threw this character in? And my big character is a guy named Dr. Faustus, who is notorious in literature for having sold his soul to the devil for basically 27 years of knowledge. One of the lousiest deals ever made in history. And that was a play written by a guy named Christopher Marlowe, like 16th century. And you and I had discussed off air, like Jeff must have done like a Dr. Faustus. So Faustus is my main pivotal character on all these supernatural mythology kind of paranormal books where people come to him for advice because now he's looking to undo the bargain and do good deeds and win his way back into heaven's heart. So sure enough, I'm doing the Aztec thing, and it's like you just can't wait to, okay, when can I get Faustus into this? Okay, he has a question about when the end times is occurring. Let's send him over and you're always injecting Dr. Faustus into the equation. So it's almost like the Hardy Boys, like they had the
Hmm.
whole series and that kind of thing. So
Well, that sounds really fun, and you're using your creative energy and your focus to get these things done. Because a lot of us have ideas or things that we miss doing, and sometimes it's hard to get out of that inertia and do something creative and to find that flow that you're talking about. And I give you a lot of credit for making the effort and getting that done and putting stuff out in the world. It can be a difficult thing to do, so I give you a lot of
very
credit
hard.
for
It's
getting there.
very hard. I mean, the thing is, too, is, I mean, it's like some days you just don't have it. I mean,
Hmm.
some days you think I have a great plot. I mean, I was going to have like the Valkyries of like German mythology teaming up with the Camelot Knights to avoid the end of the world in Ragnarok. They call it the end of the world in Norse
Yeah.
mythology. It sounds great. It just was dying on the vine, and I was dying. I was tired, and it just wasn't happening. The rain, and this yesterday. And about 11 o'clock at night, I said, I'm going to put something together. I started putting together romance, and it was terrible. The romance, it was just I tried to write, it was terrible. And then for some reason, it popped into my head about the Aztecs, and I said, let's really look at what they were about, because nobody really knows a lot, and they kind of have a mystique like the Egyptians. And I started to do some research, get some ideas, and about 4 o'clock in the morning, I quit, but I had a pretty good outline for what I wanted to do with it. And I mean, 3 episodes are in the can now. I have 12, 9 to go, 12 in total. So you'd be surprised what you can do on no sleep.
Hmm.
But it's one of those things. But yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of pushing. See, people say, "Oh, take the day off, take the day off, take another day off, go on vacation." You know what? Those people 10 years go by. Published authors. They're really, I mean, they made it. They have books out there. Yeah. Oh, I took the day off. Just get under the covers. It's raining outside. I said, you've been getting under the covers for 10 years and watching Netflix. Where's it gotten you? Have you put anything out? And for me, I'll grind away. Maybe I'll take a nap or something, but I'll keep grinding away. And it's just a matter of hitting your groove. And it takes me back to, like, I used to read a lot of sports books growing up.
Yeah.
And Tom Seaver, like, I think he got shelled or something, so he didn't even get a lot of pitches in. And he was so ticked off, and they came back from a road trip, and he opens up Shea Stadium at like 12 midnight with one of the locker room attendants. He takes like 4 buckets of baseballs because he didn't get his pitches in.
Hmm.
And he threw for like 2 hours until his ball, until he had the breaking ball working and whatever else he threw, and he was cursing at the backstop. My point, though, is he couldn't let it go, and I get that, and I think that's important. Maybe I'm too type A personality, but I mean, that was it. I mean, I didn't want to just sit around and be, I'm what is it, WKRC in Cincinnati, whatever it is, WKRC in Cincinnati,
WKRP.
whatever it was. You see, I didn't even know the name, but I couldn't hang out. I mean, I wasn't really a hangout kind of guy.
Hmm. It sounds like you took that sense of focus, which seems innate to you, and your willingness to try things and experiment and to push yourself, and that's what you're doing now. But what are the skills or thoughts or ideas did you pick up at Hofstra that you brought with you into your adult and professional life?
Well, I think that how much you can learn from other people.
Hmm.
I learned a lot from other people. Mentorships, how I learned early. I'll say as a lawyer, how I learned early on from other lawyers, and I was open to learning because I knew how much I had learned from the people who were experienced at Hofstra Radio. And then in turn, as I got more experienced, joyfully being a mentor and sharing what I knew. Like, people are stupid. They're like, "Oh, if I show you how to do this, you'll steal business from me." Like, are you stupid? Like, that's the dumbest stuff in the world. I never thought that way. So I made a lot of friends that way, and people still will. They've helped me out, because certain things have happened, and I'm trying to now reintegrate, and they've helped me out. I mean, they remember what I was able to do to help, and I think it goes back to, like, probably Jeff or a guy like Mike Kluger. Mike Kluger, the executive engineer,
Mm-hmm.
who taught me how to engineer, and he took extra time to show me. It was just really hard for me. It was a really hard, like, routine, like going from a car to a record to a this to a, and I just couldn't get it. I don't know. It was hand-eye coordination, and I kept failing the practical. And he worked with me a lot of extra hours, and he broke me in, and I became a good engineer, a decent engineer. I don't know about a good one. So my whole point is that, you learn early on. There are very good people willing to teach you, and in turn, if you can, you try to show them. So
Wow.
I mean, I learned that the mentorship of it.
If you could go back in time, if you could time travel for 60 seconds and go back and talk to yourself at 18 or 19 years old, what piece of advice would you give to yourself?
It's a very good question. I probably would have stayed more with radio. and you just hope to hook onto the network in some capacity. That's it, because I mean that's really where I wanted to be, and where I always want. I mean, different times when I was like a lawyer, I do a show on WGBB on this and that, and you buy the time and you're doing a show. So I mean, I always kind of had my hand in it. So I mean, it was something that I really never wanted to leave behind. So
Right. Wow.
yeah, I mean
Well,
I mean, other than that, good student. I got very good grades. I worked hard. I was proud of the fact I was Phi Beta Kappa. I did the sports directorship. I did a lot there. I mean, I really got my money's worth. So I can't say there's that much I left behind from Hofstra or Hofstra Radio.
well, if for not taking the chance or going deeper into a radio career. It seems like you're taking chances now and being creative and doing interesting things and being open to possibilities. And that's I think that's good advice at any age.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, Andrew, this has been so much fun. I've
I like
really
it.
appreciated your stories and your energy and your passion. And I thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you.
today.
Thank you for your time, Brian. Always a pleasure. God bless. Thank you.